Today I'm speaking with Josie Kins, who I think would best be described as a psychedelic researcher, although her projects branch across a few different areas like content creation on YouTube and Reddit. She's probably most well known for her work on the website Subjective Effect Index, which attempts to define psychedelic terminology into a standard vocabulary, with the idea being that by documenting what certain phrases mean, for example, DMT breakthrough, then it has a defined set of characteristics which we can use to make sure we're all talking about the same thing. Now, Josie is a fascinating person to chat with, and I really enjoyed this conversation. We went off on various tangents, but we covered topics like her work as a researcher, this kind of push-pull between different ideologies within the psychedelic community, materialism, spirituality, and some very out there stuff about the nature of consciousness. It was a lot of fun. I'll leave some links in the description below to Josie's YouTube channel and website, so go and check those out. And yeah, without further ado, I bring you Josie Kins.
So, let's just jump into it. So, Josie, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good actually. I've had a crazy year and a half. I started working for a biotech research company founded by a close friend of Alex Shulgin, and that's been a lot. Before I started that job, I was working minimum wage in a sex toy store, so it's a bit of a step up.
I think we might like jump too far straight in. So let's backtrack a bit then, because you and I we've talked before, but maybe just for the sort of the folks at home, because I think one of the reasons we wanted to have this conversation is that you have had this very drastic change in sort of direction and changing sort of things going on with your life in the last 18 months. But let's just backtrack just very very briefly to where we were 18 months ago, because as you say, you were you had this like one focus over here, basically around the sort of based around your website and your Reddit and stuff, and of course the sex shop. Let's not forget that was in there as well.
Right, that was funding me.
so yeah, let's introduce who you were, and then let's introduce who you have become.
Okay, sure. Well, I'm essentially the same person, but I guess a year and a half ago I was focusing on my website Effect Index and the Subjective Effect Index project, along with the R replications community. I guess I've become a somewhat prominent online figure within the drug nerd psychonaut community, mostly as the founder of Psychonaut Wiki is the most prominent thing I've done, although I haven't really been involved in that platform since around 2017, which I always try to remind people of. And I was doing that as a passion project, which I've been doing for the last 10 years or so. My main passion is trying to establish what I'm thinking of as a brand new field of formalized phenomenology that documents the altered states of consciousness from a formal academic standpoint, which kind of led me to create the Subjective Effect Index, which is the one that is currently online is a collection of around 200 individual subjective effect articles with in-depth descriptions, leveling systems, and then for the sensory effects, primarily visual stuff, there's an entire replications community that tries to produce image and video replications of what it's like to undergo those experiences. And I've been working on that for the last decade or so, and I'm still very much in that, but now I have funding from capitalism, so I have a lot more resources behind it now, which is nice.
Well, I think that's, from what I'm gathering, I guess we can get into that. It's really what's happened is a transition from a kind of a passion project into a profession, it sounds like, which is, pretty... It's almost like the kind of like, the fairy tale, the thing that you do just because you're interested in, and now suddenly you've made a career of it. But is my understanding right? Is that this has become like a career for you? So this kind of leads more into like the where we are today kind of aspect.
Yeah, pretty much. So I got picked up by a company called Mind State Design. It was founded by two guys, one of which is Tom Ray, who was a close friend of Alex Shulgin, and he's been trying to continue Shulgin's work, and another is Dylan Donato, who's more of a finance guy. And the company is essentially trying to correlate receptor affinities with subjective effect outcomes in order to design bespoke psychedelic therapies that can target specific altered states of consciousness instead of just saying I don't know, here's the entire contents of your subconscious, good luck. Instead, we want a model where we can induce very specific subjective states to lead to specific clinical outcomes. And the way that we've been trying to do that is to develop a formal classification system of altered states of consciousness, which has branched off of the subjective effect index that I've been working on for the last decade or so. We've been trying to overhaul that into a brand new version that's been based on a large-scale literature review of all known classification systems of altered states of consciousness in existence, which there are quite a few of. The subjective effect index was the most comprehensive one, but there's a bunch of other ones of varying levels of intellectual rigor and just general quality. So I've been looking at psychometric scales like the Altered States of Consciousness scale, Mystical Experience Questionnaire, MEQ 30, a bunch of different psychometric scales, and also really weird stuff like the DMT Nexus's Hyperspace Lexicon, the Erowid Psychedelic Experience FAQ, just anything that I can find. And then I've been putting them all into a system in which the terms are interconvertible. And it's essentially developed an overarching classification system which incorporates all of these other classification systems into something that's going to be published in a paper. And we are hoping it's going to be analogous to the DSM, but for altered states of consciousness instead of mental illnesses. And I'm getting regular consultations with leading experts in different fields and stuff to make sure that it's rigorous. Since I don't really have an academic background myself, I've just maxed all my skill points into this one very specific thing, and it's been really nice to get that kind of help. I've been talking a lot with a guy called Andrew Newberg, who's the world's leading expert in the neurological study of mystical and religious experiences. And he's helped me develop a new ontology or classification system of mystical and religious experiences as induced by psychedelics or other psychoactive substances, and that's been really fucking cool. And yeah, I think that's about it so far. I could probably talk about it for longer.
Well, I think just a minute, just to what you've said there, and certainly this comes into where sort of you and I have sort of crossed paths a few times. You are plugged into like a fairly big net because you have been dabbling with in these things so long. You have got this quite big network going across things like Reddit, sort of the replication subreddit that you're no doubt I'm sure you go across various other forums, but also your own Discord server. Where I see you regularly. I get pinged where like you're asking questions out to the people who are within that community, and I always thought that was a really cool thing. That I think there's a kind of a bit of a cliche within these kind of circles that when people move into these kind of positions of status within the community, that they kind of adopt a kind of like I know best sort of attitude. And from yourself, I see that you're always kind of asking, and I think that's particularly now that you have moved into this into this position that you're in, this opportunity, and that has, like you said, it's not come from an academic barrier. It's come from pure like blood and sweat, which is very admirable, to be honest, Josie. I think it's really kudos to you for crossing that boundary. But yeah, I think there's that how you go across all these different circles of kind of like the visual replication through to this kind of cataloging of stuff. Yeah, it kind of blows my mind a little bit how you've got that much mental bandwidth. So when you say you put all your skill points into it, I think it's quite actually a broad set of skills that you're managing there. But can I just ask, like, in regards to, so what does this translate into? So you mentioned you're working with this company. It seems like you're trying to correlate subjective effects with certain, you'll have to forgive my kind of layman's language, but kind of like certain pathways in the brain or certain receptors. Yeah. And what's the output of that? Is this where you would it kind of says, okay, we need a drug that looks like this, somebody go make it?
So what I want to create is, and it's probably the thing that's going to be profitable from a biotech standpoint, is a predictive model where, say, if we have a collection of psychedelics, I think right now we have 30 different psychedelics where we have broadly assayed them, so we know all of the different receptors in the brains that they affect and to what extent. If we go through experience reports, of those substances with a truly comprehensive classification system, and we label sentence fragments within those reports with the subjective effects or categories of subjective effects that they are inducing on a large scale. We can then... Oh, my headphone just fell out. 1 second. That's all right. Oh, you just got these. But yeah, we can then start to build up a predictive statistical model in which we can correlate receptor pathways with subjective effect outcomes. And what I want is a model that says, under this particular set of variables, say this person that's this gender, height, weight, age, this setting on this drug at this dosage has this percentage likelihood of experiencing this given set of subjective effects at these levels of intensity with these particular style variations, and that is likely to lead into this given therapeutic outcome to whatever degree that we possibly can. That's all plausible and doable. It's just a matter of building up enough statistical data where we can start to draw those correlations. And it's a big project. But now that I have, I've spent the last year developing this new overhaul of the subjective effect index, which it has over 500 different labels. The one that's on effect index right now has around 200 labels. The subjective effect index will be on effect index. By the way, it's not really trademarkable, which is probably a good thing. So we're hoping it's going to be sort of a universal terminology set for researchers and the general public to discuss, describe, document, study these altered states of consciousness. So yeah, I've taken this new system and I've started applying it to trip reports, and we're building up statistical correlations, but now I'm being given the resources to train teams of labelers so that we can start to do it en masse, preferably with every single trip report that is on the internet, which are, I don't know, it's probably about 50 to 100,000 reports, but that's going to take a long time. So we're starting with the substances that we have the receptor affinity data for, because there's a lot of obscure psychedelics out there where there's plenty of reports for them, but we don't know what they're doing in the brain because they're just randomized research chemicals. And analyzing those reports isn't particularly useful yet, but we'll get around to it eventually.
So is this like, I mean, if we can put this in like fairly simple terms, so you're talking about like being able to like dial in and say, I want what people refer to as like a mystical experience, or I want an ego death, or I want, or you know, even I want the God experience, or something. Is that kind of where you're going, or are you trying to like even more precise, like I want things that look like visually like this, or
so if we can induce mystical experiences consistently, that would be great. If we could induce states of unity and interconnectedness consistently, that would be amazing. I'm not entirely sure how possible that is. There do seem to be some substances that induce it more readily than others, 5-MeO-DMT being the biggest one that I can think of. But it's not necessarily consistent and it's not necessarily sustainable. So I think what we're leaning towards right now is probably just having a model where the trip can be more predictable and psychedelic therapies can be more guided, essentially, and reliable.
Okay, so it's interesting that you mentioned 5-MeO-DMT, because I was actually having a kind of a bit of a debate with another sort of YouTuber personality regarding sort of 5-MeO-DMT. And I don't tend to think of 5-MeO-DMT as like particularly mystical. I've had things that have that, you know, with a lot of these psychedelics, they cross over into various different states. But for me, you know, it very much invokes this non-dual, this kind of state of oneness. But I don't tend to think of that as the mystical experience. So I'm wondering, like within your sort of categorization, like, does that not kind of trip you up a bit that people are going to have different ideas of what these things are?
Yeah, so when it comes to a mystical experience, I prefer the term transpersonal experience. But whether or not something is a mystical experience seems to be entirely in the eye of the beholder. For example, if a hallucination or contact with an autonomous entity could be considered a mystical experience under the right circumstances, particularly if you're meeting, say, some sort of religious deity or something that you feel is a divine presence, but then say if somebody met I don't know, a mainstream religious deity, I could experience that, and since I'm not personally religious, I could see it as just an absurd, memey sort of shitpost hallucination, and the interpretation could be completely different depending on the perspective of the person. So, sorry, my throat's a bit fucked. But with mystical and transpersonal experiences, I personally find them to be spiritual, but I interpret them all. Sorry, I don't know why my throat is screwing up. Ugh.
All right,
but yeah,
take a minute and do a big throat clearer. And,
yeah, I'll just mute myself.
go for it. I'll just fill in the awkward silence now while
Yeah,
Josie's clearing. There we go,
it's
she's
fine. If you can edit out later, I know you probably won't. It's whatever. Yeah. So I tend to view everything through a materialist lens, and I consider myself a spiritual person, but mostly kind of from a perspective of secular Buddhism or something in that realm. People do pick up on these things very differently, and I regularly have people hounding me on the internet talking about non-material planes and DMT entities being real, and a lot of people are angry at me on YouTube right now for insisting that DMT entities are hallucinations. So that's been interesting. But yeah, people do seem to interpret these things completely differently.
Cool. Well, can we just have a little bit of fun with that? Let's unpack some of the stuff you just said there. Then. So, because I think what you kind of describe yourself as like a spiritual materialist, and I think probably I would kind of use those labels for myself. And similarly, you get people who are very devout with this kind of stuff, and the model that I've kind of proposed for the, although not officially, although this will be something I'll be putting in my upcoming book, insert quick plug. But yeah, I kind of tend to think of these things as really like very slightly overlapping magisteria, so that if we kind of could think of, like, say, the sort of the center of the sort of Venn diagram is us, the experience that we're having, and we're interacting with a material plane and a with night we interact with a dream plane, and we've got this ongoing emotional plane and psyche. So these kind of different magisteria are kind of overlapping through the central point of us. And I think it's the mistake that people make within the psychedelic community is around this world of real, that people kind of need psychedelics to be real. And I would kind of put it in the same kind of things, like, I don't need my dreams to physically manifest in material reality in front of me, just like I don't need the love I have for my children to physically manifest as, like, solid fluffy hearts. So I think if everyone could just chill out and just accept that these things are like their own independent sort of realms of fuck knows what, then they could all get on a little bit better. But yeah, do you want to throw your own thoughts in there?
So I feel the same way. I don't think the fact that these hallucinations aren't fifth-dimensional aliens from the future lessens the spiritual and emotional impact that they have. I don't think that's necessary. I think it's pretty amazing that the human brain is the most complex system in the known universe, and that it can generate consciousness at all, and that it can generate multiple consciousnesses at the same time. I do think when you communicate with an autonomous entity, it is sentient in a way, just because the brain is capable of generating that, but I do very much think you're just communicating with the subconscious.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I tend to lean, I mean, I flip-flop between a lot of these different theories, and I tend to sort of like go down some rabbit holes to have fun with them. But the one I do tend to lean more towards is the kind of more like the Jungian archetype sort of point of view. And I think it doesn't seem particularly radical to me. I know what the inside of my own head sounds like, and it's annoying. It's got, there are like different voices coming to surface even if I don't want them to. So the idea that one of these could take the form of some kind of archetype that's either been culturally or genetically embedded within me doesn't seem, completely preposterous. But yeah, I think I think how the kind of the need to jump to aliens or the divine or something, it just seems a bit unnecessary. And I think particularly when we know, I think most people would recognize that from our dreams, you can have very, very powerful dreams. I've woken up in tears after dreams from relationships. I've had, I remember, having dreams of like where I had children that I never had, and the recognition, the realization that I was going to wake up and lose this child. I was bawling my eyes out. So. And again, I don't need that to be physically real. So it's a funny one that people have to validate something so transcendent in something so, just kind of like it seems very unnecessary for me. But if I can just if you mentioned the kind of like the spiritual element, and I'm just being plain sort of devil's advocate here. So how would you define that part of it?
Spirituality.
Yeah.
To me, spirituality is putting one's life into a bigger picture context that gives it a meaning beyond itself. And you can do that through some sort of mythology or story, such as, the standard Abrahamic religions or anything like that. Or you can do it through models that don't depend on things that aren't scientific. I don't think it's necessary to kind of invoke those sorts of things to be spiritually satisfied. A lot of Buddhism is a good example of that, and I do think that there is a drive within human brains to develop, I guess, spiritual frameworks that put one's life into a bigger picture context in order to give a person a sense of meaning and purpose and context. And I think that part of the brain is quite prevalent, and that psychedelics activate it, and it causes people to come up with all these crazy ideas about how the world works if they regularly undergo psychedelic experiences without some sort of rational, grounded framework to interpret those experiences through. So I often call this experience McKenna syndrome. Like, I'm a huge fan of McKenna, but I think that if you do a lot of psychedelics, your brain will start to come up with very interesting theories about how things work to put your life into a context. And if you're prone to new agey or pseudoscientific belief systems, then you'll start coming up with the stereotypical things that a lot of psychedelic users end up being involved in.
Yeah, I completely agree around sort of, I consider myself a fan of McKenna, but I think, the one thing that's always worth pointing out with Terence McKenna, for all his brilliance and all his poetry, there was a bit where he was completely fucking nuts. Like, he definitely had a blip where it was all these kind of time wave zero stuff, and I think that's the kind of the part with psychedelics that can be quite insidious, because they can I think people are kind of very used to the idea of you take psychedelics and something dramatic happens and you're instantly mad, but this kind of chipping away at sort of rationality and just sort of what sort of makes sense and what doesn't. And I've seen this happen in like a lot of people. I think that's definitely what happened with Terence McKenna. And then you start conforming things to fit your wacky ideas. And yeah, I've seen some guys getting some real tricky states with that. So I mean, you mentioned sort of like grounding. I mean, what's your basis? So is it just have you got any particular framework that you use for keeping yourself sort of centered?
So it's nothing that's particularly fleshed out that I could debate in a philosophy kind of context, but I tend to just view the world through a materialist lens. I don't believe in magic, and I haven't seen any evidence that those sorts of things exist, so I tend to just interpret everything as occurring through physical process and the human mind, which I just see as an electrochemical computer, and I interpret everything through that lens, and I just haven't had any experiences that seem to me like I need to invoke anything more than that to explain them. And I haven't really heard of anybody having experiences that truly necessitate anything beyond that. There are things with synchronicities that start to make my framework crack a little bit, but I could totally see synchronicities or events that seem unrelated but actually are related existing as some sort of physical mechanism of how the universe progresses over time. So I could see that being a thing. I just don't really think that DMT entities exist outside of the human brain. I think that if you take a hallucinogenic, you will hallucinate, and that's the simplest explanation. I tend to think of Occam's razor a lot when I'm considering these sorts of questions.
Yeah, I just tend to, for me, just like yourself, rather than rooting it in, I guess what you know, I mean, it depends on what your definition of materialism. I just tend to root it in like kind of the experience that I know I'm having as a human being. So I kind of think of, you know, well, what good does it serve me when, like, you know, I spent a reasonable amount of time on like sort of like ayahuasca retreats and sort of, you know, places in South America, and there you get everybody from the full spectrum of New Age, you know, people who like fallen off the New Age ladder and just twatted their head down every single rung on the way down.
Oh my
God. No, you get some right characters where, you know, people are talking about, you know, crystals and you know, just every brand of like sort of aliens and black magic and all sorts of stuff which I kind of roll my eyes at. But yeah, when people are like going off with that stuff, I just tend to ask them like, well, how does this serve you in like your human experience? Like even if you do go into some of like the very kind of like more kind of new agey or religious stuff where you're saying, you know, this is you know, this is like a training ground for some kind of other life that's going to happen afterwards. And my kind of thought is, well, I mean, sure, or if it's a simulation or whatever, like, then just surely the kind of the role is then to just make the best of this situation. Like, what good does it do for me to sit there sort of like wondering when aliens or Jesus is going to appear? So I can just, through that framework, just grounded it in my human experience, and my human experience is kind of in this material realm. But then, yeah, I mean, certainly I can definitely relate to the kind of flack you must get with, because people don't like hearing that sort of thing. But I must admit that, and certainly, you know, something I did last year, every so often I do get these kind of urges to just think, fuck it, let's just see what it's like to go absolutely mad, and just kind of really just fully immerse yourself in what more or less becomes a kind of a completely altered state of being for some amount of time. And that's kind of like what happens at one of these, like, you know, ayahuasca retreats, or when I did like DMT straight for a month sometime last year. And then it's things I could really empathize with guys like sort of Terence McKenna, how reality shifts, or how the base character sheet kind of re-rolls itself a little bit, and you start accepting things. So I was wondering, have you ever like sort of, I mean, or maybe you have you ever just like felt like just going, fuck this, let's just let's check out brain and let's.
Yeah, so I had an experience recently where I went to a ketamine retreat in the mountains of Colorado as a sort of corporate team building exercise, you know, standard stuff. And the lady there was
team building exercise ever.
We did a lot of team building. It was great. The lady there was kind of new agey. I loved her. She was amazing. And we did all sorts of Native American rituals and things like that. And man, I was into it. And I had the most beneficial experience with ketamine that I've ever had. And I've done ketamine countless times. But setting intentions, going through all these rituals, playing this weird mystical new agey music, having this lady doing prayers to various directions, like north, south, east, west, up, down, etc. All of that, it really contributed to the experience. I kind of see ritual as a way of hijacking placebo effect to guide the trip and make it more intentional and powerful. And yeah, that was the only experience I've ever had where I've gone ahead and done stuff like that, and it really did have a big impact on me. I remember being kind of an edgy teenager and hearing from people that I don't know, you can only do ayahuasca with a licensed shaman in the rainforest or whatever. So I thought, fuck this, I'm going to do ayahuasca in the least spiritual locations that I can possibly think of. I did ayahuasca and I walked into a McDonald's. I did ayahuasca and I went to a pub or the cinema, and the ayahuasca gods didn't kill me or anything like that. But I guess the experience was also less impactful and less meaningful, and I got less out of it. So, yeah.
I mean, that
I
sort
just
of
kind of see that stuff as a tool.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think that's where I would use the term sort of framework, and I can roll my eyes and cringe as good as the next person, or in some of the kind of religion almost that is springing up around the kind of like the ayahuasca scene in South America, which is very interesting because in fact like all the shaman that I know in South America would completely reject that kind of religious aspect of it. I know there is some kind of, I spend more time in Peru. When you get to Brazil, there's more of a crossover with it into like Christianity, where you go into like the Santo Daime church and stuff.
Oh, that's weird.
But the way they kind of, in Peruvian Amazon, the way they kind of view it is that there's nothing supernatural going on here at all. This is completely natural because it's the plants. They kind of revere the plants, and so it's they don't see anything particularly spooky about these experiences. But I certainly found like immense value in taking part in these traditions for like similar reasons, like you just said. And I go and hold my hands, but I go and culturally appropriate the fucking shit out of that. I'm fully gabbed up in all like the Peruvian sort of Shipibo gear. And yeah, I think you're right in that it's kind of tapping into this placebo sort of mechanism, or whatever that is, because it's such a not understood thing. But it's the way I kind of think of it is you're signaling to yourself, you particularly when you go into one of these retreats and you go into like a ceremonial space, and there is an air of reverence to it. The kind of the air of reverence is genuine, because you kind of you're revering what's about to happen, and you're recognizing that you want everyone in the room to have a good experience, and you want this to be a good event. And I think there's something very beautiful about that, and particularly when you get I've been in sort of ayahuasca ceremonies, and like the shamans have been over like sort of singing songs, and I'm just thinking, Jesus Christ, what a fucking amazing just slice of humanity, that I'm sat here on this mat in another country completely off my tits, and there's a guy here who is singing for my spiritual well-being, my physical well-being as well. And it doesn't matter whether I believe it or not. They don't have any requirement for me to believe it, but they're just going to do it anyway because that's what they believe is right. I know, and they're singing a language which communicates with this experience, and it does. I mean, it really. Well, we know how much music affects these things, so they're very tuned into particular sort of kind of types of music, and it's just such a. When you talk about things as being a spiritual experience, it really is a spiritual experience. But then the danger there is that it can cross over into becoming a religious experience and some dogmatic experience, which is, I think what you would kind of push back against. But it's interesting that you've had that experience, because I think last time we talked to you, I think you were definitely more towards the kind of like, no, this is all bullshit side of things.
Yeah, I guess I was. I mean, I hadn't experienced implementing any ritual within my own psychedelic experiences, or this was a dissociative experience, but it still did the job before, and this was my first time of it, and it definitely made a big difference to the experience. I overcame some things that I had trouble emotionally processing for a year prior, and I had plenty of trips for the year or so prior, but it finally did it, and I do think it was involving that intention and that ritual into the experience.
Yeah, I would totally agree. I think a lot of the, and here's again where it's kind of the language is a little bit eye-rolly, but it's once you kind of get over your own sort of, and by your own I mean my own as well, like kind of internal sort of edgelord skepticism, sort of eye-rolliness, then the kind of the word I'm talking about is healing, and I've done more than my fair of share psychedelics, sort of, you know, in my bedroom and sort of in my apartment and stuff like that. And I don't think I could have made the same emotional connections as I did, like having this kind of experience, like I just talked about, having somebody just sort of be a sort of proxy for my well-being. And even though it was kind of in a language I couldn't understand, and it was the atmosphere, the intention of what was coming out of these people just connects to something on you on like a human level, which I don't think you can just reach just getting absolutely fucking, you know, I mean, I'm not you know, disregarding the experiences I've had on my own. They're amazing, but there's those experiences that I have are kind of one thing. I think of those as more the kind of like exploring experiences, but these kind of healing experiences really take on their own shape within these kind of frameworks. And I think that's where I think, you know, people probably need to I think pay a bit more attention and give them a bit more respect, because because I think that, you know, there's a lot of kind of you know, talk online of like, you know, no, this is just bullshit, this is just fucking like, you know, ancient, you know, you're just fetishizing some kind of ancient sort of tradition, and maybe that's true to some extent, but it doesn't make it less effective. It still it works like nothing else I've known it.
Yeah, over the generations, I do think that they have figured out ways to guide the trip and sort of hack the brain through these rituals and these activities, and I think it works. I don't think it's magical, but it's definitely really powerful. So something that I've tried to take into account since that experience is that setting intentions for trips makes a huge difference. Yeah. If I want something that I'm trying to process or overcome, then I need to set intentions. Like, I need to write down what I want out of the trip. I need to say it out loud, do everything I possibly can. And then when I go into the experience, I'm much more likely to have it actually go in that direction. I wish that's something I knew more about when I first started tripping over a decade ago as a teenager.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I do a lot of things from like literally writing notes down in diaries, you know, so I can sit there and read it moments before I go into these things, because a lot of the times, particularly with the stuff in South America, I'm going into them with the kind of like, oh shit, what am I doing this again, like, and just having it there like in readable form is really helpful. And I totally agree. I think it can having that kind of focus really, or just something you can, rather than just like, oh well, I'll get blasted, I'll see what unfolds, I'll see what this substance does to me, to give it that bit of direction. It can can completely change the colour of the trip. And just I think, you know, just something you said there around the kind of like, it's not magical. I think this is I think this is one I'm kind of, I don't know, it's a wiggly one to navigate, because these kind of feelings of spirituality, of these feelings of like the sacred, which again pop up a lot, particularly with these kind of like healing experiences or these kind of traditional settings. I would agree it is not literally magic, as in like the lots of sort of, you know, Merlin the magician and that kind of stuff, but it certainly evokes the sense of something far bigger and more expansive than myself, which then feels incredibly real and transformative. And so I think maybe the kind of the magic is kind of just a bit of a clumsy word. I'll certainly grant you there are people out there who start thinking about magic. And in fact, I was just on a retreat in June, where there was like, some of these guys, you would have absolutely loved them. They were talking about like they were under attack by black magic, and they were being they were black magic poison darts, invisible poison darts are being stabbed into them and stuff like that. And I was just
interesting.
And this was stuff that, I mean, first of all, it was kind of like annoying because it was just nonsense, and it was even more annoying because they started papping on about black magic like literally like 5 minutes before we drank ayahuasca, and I was like, oh fucking hell, guys, just
black magic. Okay.
I was like, if you really believe in all this stuff, just, you know, time and a place, just shut the fuck up and, like, you know, have a bit of, you know, take a moment of quiet time. So I think that's maybe something, and this is where I think your work with around subjective effects and the language that you're putting together around this stuff is really interesting, because I think there's something there where it allows to parse out magic, from just kind of some altered state. And that, I think maybe the thing which gets people's back up there is it almost sounds like it's being dismissed just to call it like an altered state. But I don't know. I mean, have you any thoughts around that?
Yes. Hang on. I'm going to swap my headphones around because I think they're actually in the wrong ear, and that's why I need to keep adjusting them.
Oh, it's all right. This is all part of the magic, Joe. So we're getting like a real insight into what goes on. So yeah, genius psychonaut by day, but she's just like clumsy as folk by night.
That is definitely true. Okay, what was the question again?
Oh god, yeah, you've totally derailed the whole thing. No, what we're saying, it was something about people viewing the kind of the term altered states as being somewhat derogatory, and so that's like kind of they wanting. Yeah, I mean, let me try and arrange
people
my
see it
thoughts
as dismissive. I've tried to make the wording in the new subjective effect index at least a little more ontologically neutral. So I've been talking to a guy called Daniel Ingram, who's a pretty prominent writer in what do I even call it, like the Buddha Bro meditation community. He's really smart guy, and he's encouraging me to be more ontologically neutral in how I describe these things. So instead of calling an effect delusion of telepathy, maybe call it perception of telepathy, and just little things like that. I guess I can see why people think that it's dismissive, but I'm trying to get to a point where the descriptions just document the experience and have as little bias or comment on whether or not it's actually a real experience within them as possible. That's something I've been trying to get a little better at in general. I don't know if this is related, but I've had a lot of people say that to describe these things at all is some sort of a sin. Like I'm unweaving the rainbow. I'm taking away the magic by putting words to it, and I firmly disagree with that kind of a viewpoint. I also have a lot of people say that you can't describe these things because words will never fully capture the experience. And while I agree that that's true, I also think that that's true with using words for literally anything. I think words and labels are inherently reductive and will never fully capture the subjective experience of something, but they can be pretty good at it. And I don't think the psychedelic experience is a unique exception. I just think we need to develop a terminology system to discuss and describe those things, and then we can go from there.
Yeah, I think, I mean, the thing with, I would totally agree around the kind of, that words are never going to sort of do it justice. But I mean, like you say, it's the same thing. Words will never describe sex. I mean, what are you going to, and you can, as long as you agree on, definitions of stuff, then you're going to get in the same sort of linguistic ballpark. And I think that's kind of good enough. And where I try and go with my sort of attempts at it is, to really kind of, I focus more on the narrative aspect and kind of my journey, like, and I turn it into a kind of a story. I absolutely acknowledging that this is nothing like it, but I kind of, without being too up my own ass, I'm trying to sort of, I guess, more related to kind of like poetry. Like I'm trying to invoke something rather than sort of literally describe. So when I, because when I do something like a YouTube video, which is a trip report, and I'm relying upon visuals provided by other people and stuff like that, those aren't my visuals, and it's not, it's a 2D representation. So I try and like think, okay, well, what did this actually mean to me? Like, what was I experiencing here? And so I kind of like put it into these kind of terms of what it felt like. But if I can just rewind to kind of what you were saying around the sort of perceptual telepathy and delusional telepathy, and if I could just like sort of poke around with that for a bit, because I
telepathy experiences specifically.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose, because I think what kind of pops out, it seems like it's this need for it to be real, like when I say like material real, because I think if we use the word telepathy, then I mean, the thing that springs to mind, this is X-Men sort of stuff. We're talking about sort of mind-to-mind communication,
wireless thought communication.
Yeah, which just sounds absolutely horrific. That other people start chiming on inside my head.
Right.
But I think
people experience it a lot on psychedelics. I definitely have.
Oh yeah, for sure. I have had that experience, but I would describe it as telepathy without it ever having to be rooted in material reality, because but I think that also leaves it open for it to be like, you know, whatever it is, in any kind of in any realm. So, you know, if tomorrow there was absolutely scientific evidence that there is a pervading field of consciousness, and that we're acting as kind of receivers for it, and we're kind of interacting in a way that like mass interacts with gravity or something like that, then I think that the telepathy aspect could still sort of work, because it's nothing to do with what's going on in the material world. It's happening within this kind of consciousness field at that point. So I think that I can see why that term of delusion of telepathy would sort of get people's backs up, because it completely dismisses it. Whereas I think perception, again, I know we're playing language games here, but I think it does massage the community a little bit.
I think delusion of telepathy is too dismissive even from my own perspective on those experiences. I'm completely open to the idea that that mirror neurons are doing something, that people's psychedelic experiences are more similar, that shared hallucinations can be a thing, that primate brains under certain circumstances can synchronize with each other, or that human beings can communicate with each other through subtle types of body language that we're not even consciously aware of, or that science isn't even consciously aware of. And I do also think that there's a lot of I'm trying to think. What's it called? Theory of mind. The system that you develop as a child, where you realize that people know things that you don't know, and vice versa. I do think that that is quite often suppressed under the influence of a psychedelic. And when you combine it with those other factors, I do think that brains likely sync up to a greater degree than people are aware of. I've done some reading into mirror neurons, and it seems quite interesting. I think that that can lead to experiences that would seem very similar to an experience of telepathy without actually being telepathy in the traditional sense, or how people usually consider it.
Yeah, I think I've certainly had experiences of telepathy, of, you know, again, using the word very sort of loosely here, but where it felt like it was like, that's how I would describe how I was communicating with the experience, and with the kind of the autonomous entities that were within that experience. It was this, there was an entirely open and transparent communication going on. And particularly one of the ones that really sticks in my head was within one of these ayahuasca retreats, and I was looking around the room, and it did feel like we were all inhabiting some sort of like ethereal plane of existence, and that we there was a lot of what felt like I mean, one kind of phrase that gets used is like boundary dissolution, of where it just felt like there was no end of me, and you know, everyone was just kind of flowing into each other. And I've certainly have had that experience a lot, you know, even at home with my wife, where it's just it just feels like you just merged into one sort of like virtual reality metallic blob of, I don't know, blob.
And that you're having the exact same experience.
Well, I mean, to me, I think that's interesting. I don't think it matters if we're having the exact same. I think what kind of matter is that I don't know. It almost becomes its own separate thing. Like it is just, that's what it is. It's just boundary dissolution. You just merged somehow. Right.
So that to me sounds less like what I would think of as a perception of telepathy, although it's definitely involved, and more ego dissolution, or unity and interconnectedness, where your sense of identity and self becomes expanded to include that which you previously considered separate from yourself, which often is your immediate external environment, and the people around you, particularly if they're a close romantic partner, is much more likely to happen. And it can feel like you're one unified system of behavior rather than these two separate entities, and that separation was an illusory construct of the human mind. And I guess that could probably lead to feeling like perceptions of telepathy are occurring.
Yeah,
But,
I think
I guess I'd add a bit of a distinction between them personally.
No,
assuming I interpreted what you said correctly.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. I think I flowed from one topic into the other. I dissolved
It's easy to
boundaries.
do that.
Yeah, I'd had a minor bout of boundary dissolution in my own sort of thoughts there. But yeah, no,
That happens.
I've what I was kind of getting at is that I've had these moments of kind of like group telepathy where it's it was kind of I think that this is one of the things that kind of jumps out to me is when you have a lot of these experiences and where you find yourself having to use words which previously might have been uncomfortable with. Because I remember having my first kind of like spiritual experience and thinking, shit, that was a spiritual, like, what am I going to do now? I've just been like a die-hard fucking atheist for like the last 20 years. Like, how am I going to start using this language? And it's a similar thing with telepathy. It's like, all right.
What did you do?
Well, I had to kind of, do what I think the honest, interrogation of my own beliefs and so I think, okay, well, how am I going to describe these things? How am I going to define them to myself so that I'm speaking in a consistent way and not just raving like a fucking dickhead about like telepathy angels and spirituality. So I put some kind of effort, and I think interestingly a lot of what had got me to that place of non-spirituality came in very useful in passing out that, because a lot of the kind of why do I not believe in like mainstream religion, and why am I skeptical about it? In fact, why am I good at arguing about certain things, and that when it came to then this new sort of vocabulary of experiences and the actual vocabulary to describe them, I was like, okay, I'm going to have to, when I use things, I'm going to have to make sure that I spell out exactly what I mean here, and that be clear that when I am talking in poetic terms, and so that I'm not because I think this is where I see a lot of the stuff that kind of bugs me a little bit in the psychedelic experiences, where people will not be clear on what they're saying, whether am I being poetic now, am I doing a bit of narrative fluff, or am I saying that I literally believe this to be true? And I hope that I kind of make that distinction, like, yeah, this is a trip report, this is just my words, it's not my belief system, I'm not going to go home and treat my kids as if this is factual, but this is what it felt like. And I think that's a kind of an easy disclaimer to fall back, is like, this is what it felt like telepathy. It felt like I was one with the universe and all this. I felt like I met God, and I mean, he did. I mean, so sometimes you can't get away from that.
Yeah, I mean, I've certainly had my fair share of those experiences. I think psychedelics have led me down the pantheist route, if you're familiar with the idea of pantheism.
I don't know. Go on. Just remind me what pantheism is. I've got that many isms.
Okay, so there's a lot of isms. But pantheism is the idea that everything is God, and that the universe as a concept is identical to the concept of God. The way I usually hear people justify that is that if the universe is the all-knowing creator and sustainer of existence, that meets the definition of God. Therefore, the universe is God. Then once they start going down non-dualist, monistic ideas of unity, where the universe is a unified system of behavior, it's all one thing, which we all are, then they start to feel that they are God, but so is everything around them, and so is the entire universe. And that's a conclusion I see people reach quite a lot on psychedelics, and I don't think that there's inherently anything pseudo-scientific about that. It ultimately comes down to, how do you define these words? If you define God as something that could be considered the same as the universe, then yeah, the universe is God. But if you consider God to be an anthropomorphized deity that is separate from the universe, for example, in the traditional Christian sense, then no, the universe wouldn't meet the definition of God, and the idea of pantheism doesn't make any sense at all. So it kind of comes down to a game of semantics at that point.
Yeah, I think also it's what you do with the what is the outcome of that belief system. So I think like I say, I flip-flop between them all the time. And I think, to sit there and, like you just described, if you're going to call the Big Bang or creation, I think is actually a better sort of term than God. Just like creation itself, and it gets away from a lot of the baggage there as well. Then absolutely, you can see that we are all that. But then if you start sort of saying yes, and because I know we are that, I've got a direct telephone to it because I've unlocked some sort of high, then blah 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 blah. That's where it kind of starts getting on my tits a bit, and it's people start getting a bit carried away with it. But I just wanted with the pantheism. So this is different to panpsychism, or is that the same?
Panpsychism, I guess pan meaning all, is the idea that consciousness is a spectrum and that everything in the universe is conscious to some degree. It's not an on or off light switch. Like a rock is conscious. If you hit it with a hammer, it responds. It's aware of some amount of input. Everything is conscious in that way, I guess. And that's panpsychism. I think the ideas are kind of adjacent, but they're not the same thing.
Yeah, and even within panpsychism, I know there's kind of there's a spectrum across it, where from I think the idea there is just that matter generates consciousness, and the more complex the matter is assembled, then the more consciousness something will be. So when you get to something like ourselves, we're very conscious, whereas the rock is a little bit conscious. But one kind of interesting output of panpsychism, I thought, was then that then gives the space for something like the sun to be conscious. This kind of extremely complex system. But just kind of like glowing with sort of consciousness and bursting, giving life out in it, which then interestingly ties into all these kind of the religious revelation of the sun. So I'm not sure how I feel about them, but I do like sort of, I say, going down these rabbit holes with different ideas.
I suspect that panpsychism is true, but I have nothing to base that on other than a vague sense of intuition and the drugs telling me it's true. So I wouldn't try to assert that claim in any kind of a formal setting, but I suspect it's probably the case. I don't know if you've heard of the soft and the hard problems of consciousness, but it is one solution to the hard problem of consciousness, and it seems plausible to me.
Yeah, I actually heard a podcast with someone doing a really good case for panpsychism. And again, when I first heard it, I thought, this guy's bananas. But then as it went on, I was like, okay, it's kind of it's quite hard to poke holes in. But I mean, I think you said earlier that you kind of leaned towards the side where that it's like consciousness emerging out of sort of human brains, something like you don't give much credence to kind of consciousness, that we are receiving conscious or interacting with consciousness somehow. She's having a cough. I'll make cough.
My throat's fucked today. It generally always is. I have Tourette syndrome, so I just chronically clear my throat against my own will, and that results in my throat constantly being fucked. But whatever. I'm very neuroatypical.
Yeah, every time I talk to you, you spring some sort of new there's some sort of condition that I've got. There's something going on with my life, but you hide it very well.
Oh, thank you. I had my brain scanned recently by a neuroscientist, and it was off the charts. Apparently, in lots of ways that were good, lots of ways that were terrible, and it was a pretty interesting experience. I got diagnosed with all of the things, but maybe they all just kind of balance each other out,
Is that not just an American sort of thing? Because where they're just trying to oh yeah, you've got all these things, we'll just diagnose you.
No, so I got brain scanned with an EEG at this ketamine retreat, and I found out a number of things about myself, which put a lot of things into context for me. So I'm extremely neuroatypical. I have no resting brain state. I'm constantly jumping from brain state to brain state to brain state, which is extremely abnormal. My default mode network, which is the part of the brain that's responsible for generating a sense of self, is just offline. It has almost no activity at all, which probably explains why I am persistently depersonalized. Like, I have no sense of self or identity or agency whatsoever. Like, I'm talking right now and there are words coming out my mouth, but when I use words like I and me, it's more just a grammatical construct. It's more of an autopilot feeling, and it's just happening as a sort of autonomous program, like I'm some sort of electrochemical system that's responding to sensory input with pre-programmed responses. So that probably ties into why I don't believe in free will, because I don't even experience that illusion of free will. Although I went for a period of my time where I did regain my sense of self through tripping, and I had it for about 3 years, and it's like, wow, I'm an agent approaching an external environment, and I can manipulate that external environment around me by exerting my free will and moving my body and making decisions and stuff. And I don't have that anymore. I'm just on autopilot 100% of the time.
So you're like
some sort of
you're like
autonomous machine.
Yeah, you're like the anti of everybody else in the psychedelic community. Like, everyone else is trying to get rid of the sense of self, and you're like, you were happy to gain it. Can we just unpack a little bit there for the benefits of like the audience, what we're talking about with sense of self? So I take it you're talking about the kind of the sense that you are kind of like I mean, the way that most people tend to think of this is like that they are like a pilot within themselves. Like, I am operating the Rob meat body, and then people tend to do like stuff like meditation or psychedelics to realize that this is just happening. So that are we on the same sort of term set there?
Yeah. So, from what I have gathered, there is, generally speaking, in human beings, there is a spectrum of things that the brain labels as itself versus not itself. Most people, they will label their brain, body, their general conception of who they are as a person as their self, their thought stream or their ability to perform actions. They'll label that as me. And then there is, at some point, there's a delineation that's kind of arbitrary where it becomes not me. When people go through experiences of unity and interconnectedness, that system of what is included in this conception of me expands to the point where it can include a person's internally stored model of reality, which in modern day humans is just the universe as a whole. So they'll think, I am the entire universe. I am everything that I know to exist, everything that is in my internally stored model of reality. That I would consider to be the highest level of selfhood, as in the most concepts that a person has in their model of reality has their sense of self applied to it. And then on the other end of the spectrum, there's depersonalization, which is where I am, where I don't have a sense of me-ness or selfness applied to anything. Like, I'm not going through a state of unity or anything like that. I just don't have a sense of self. So none of it feels like me. My thought process don't feel like me when I do things. It doesn't feel like me. It's more the way that I can describe it to most people is a lot of people do enter that state sometimes when they're performing an action which are not really paying attention. So you go for a long drive and then you get to the end of the drive and you're like, oh, I was on autopilot that whole time. Wasn't really paying attention, and now I'm just here. It's like that, but just all the time. And it sounds terrible, but I seem to function and I seem to be emotionally well adjusted somehow. So
yeah, so
whatever.
Does that not sort of have any impact on like sort of your ability to like say form like meaningful connections with sort of things, things around like how you place yourself within either these experiences or within relationship with others, or is it just that you're kind of it's just happening, but you're still getting value from it somehow, or is there something there to receive the value? Or
so this mind-body system is still receiving value and positive experiences from the world that is around it, but there's just no sense of self applied to it. And I've just kind of learned to live with that at this point. I've been like that since the age of 14, apart from that 3-year period where I temporarily regained a sense of self. And it doesn't seem to make much of a difference. It did implement certain biases into the subjective affect index because for a long time I thought that ego death was an extension of long-term memory suppression. Because when I go through ego death, my sense of self doesn't disappear because I don't have a sense of self in the first place. So I only know that I'm going through ego death when I can no longer remember my name or what I am as a general concept, rather than when my sense of self or identity has disappeared. So for me, it's like, can I remember that concept? Can I recall that concept? So I always put ego death in the subjective affect index as a side effect of long-term memory suppression. So I had like memory suppression, starting with short-term memory suppression, leading up to long-term memory suppression, and that, in my mind, was ego death. And I since realized over the last couple of years that that was a bias that was implemented into it entirely through my extremely unusual brain, and that's not how it is for everyone. So I guess it has impacted some things in a minor way, and that's the only really clear-cut example that I can think of.
Yeah, ego. I'm not even. You can put out a lot of words that try and come near it, but it's. I think it's the non-existence of me. I don't know.
Well, the term ego death is colloquial and does not refer to anything specific. I did a lot of research into the term, and I concluded that when the term is usually used, it's largely arbitrary. There are multiple different types of ego death that can be triggered by different things, and I've identified all of those different types. But generally speaking, if a random person says ego death, they could be referring to anything. They could be referring to a DMT breakthrough in which their sense of ego wasn't affected at all. But they call it ego death because it was intense.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I've even come across that with people using the term breakthrough. And this is something, I mean, we were talking recently around the e-mesh as a device for this kind of like one-hit breakthrough. And I've had people try that device and suddenly realize, actually, they'd never broken through. They were like, they had no idea what they were talking about until they had this. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And because, I mean...
Hey, your video's gone.
My video's gone. Uh-oh.
Yeah, and your audio's all roboty.
Oh shit. Okay, so what's going on? This is supposed to be the good solution. Right, let me see.
That's all right.
Anything going on? I'll just make sure I've got to close a few things down. I'll tell you what.
Video will return when your internet improves, it tells me.
Oh, see, I've not got anything like that on my side. I think what maybe we can just trust in because it is doing this local buffering thing, and we'll trust in the technology gods that it will reconcile all. But yeah, people suddenly.
I can hear you all right now.
You can hear me, okay, good. So,
yeah.
So people suddenly realise that they didn't know what a breakthrough was, which is it's kind of understandable with something like DMT, because even at the lower doses it's still so absolutely fucking bonkers. But again, this is something I'm going to try and spell out a little bit in my this kind of book I'm planning on writing, which is I'll just do a quick shameless plug. So yeah,
I'd be curious to hear your conception of ego death, and we can compare notes.
Yeah, sure. Like I said, I think it's one where I'd have to I'd have to jab it a lot to put words. So just give me a little bit of wiggle room. When I experienced it again, so like when it was one of these things where it's like, shit, that was ego death, there's no other word for it. It was awareness without anything that I would identify as me being there. There was something was happening, but there wasn't anything there for me to reference or be scared of or feel like I was losing something or gaining something even. It was just a very, if it's a word like voidy, but I mean voidy makes it sound black and dark and like there was nothing. That's not what it was. There was an experience. It was very undefinable. Like I couldn't say, oh, there was a light coming from over there, or there was a dude there. It was just a happening. So very like sort of pre-Big Bang, and I get this is why what a lot of the kind of the religious stuff could tie into it. It's like if Genesis starts with in the beginning there was, this is like in the you've not even got to like there was the word or anything like that. This is like before the word was spoken was ego death, and it's and I think the bits where it can be jarring or sort of or disturbing are on the way in and the way out, because in the middle there's nothing there to be jarred, and I think the people who freak out on it haven't quite gotten there yet, or are sort of freaking out on the way in. So yeah, I don't know if that's how I would kind of put it together.
Yeah, so within the types of ego death that I have identified, that would fall under absent selfhood. I did a YouTube video on ego death recently that goes into some of the different categories, although there are other categories that I didn't include that I've recently discovered, so I'm mad about that, but whatever. But absent selfhood is pretty much just the person's sense of self disappears, and what you're left with is awareness or experience without a subject. So there's experience coming in, but there's no you to comment on it, to think about it, to interpret it. It's just pure awareness by itself without a subject. And yeah, that to me, that's what, when I say ego death, that is what I am referring to. I'm referring to absent selfhood. Your sense of selfhood is gone, obliterated. But when other people use it, it can refer to all sorts of things. People often use it as well to refer to experiences of unity and interconnectedness or non-dualism. But I would say that that's a little counterintuitive, because your sense of self has actually expanded in a lot of ways. It's including more concepts than it did previously. So I think it's a little silly to refer to that as ego death. But generally, as far as I can tell, in most cases, when people use that term, they're just referring to a general disruption in their sense of self or selfhood, which I guess does include unity or expanded selfhood.
Yeah, I think this is another, I think what we're talking about is another reason why the work that you're doing is so. It's certainly what drew me to things like the subjective effects index, because to have a common vocabulary for this stuff, I think is. I would be a bit, I think probably wrong to say it's critical, but it's so beneficial. Just like, it's like having a common vocabulary to discuss terms of law or terms of education. It's you just need it. And I think then once you've kind of got that baseline, people can go off and start using things in more poetic ways. But yeah, it's I think, again, super kudos to you for taking the time to document all this stuff, because yeah, and kudos to your special brain for allowing that. But before we got sidetracked onto your brain, I did want to. We were sort of going off and down the tangent.
Oh, we were
of the fields of consciousness and the brain as an antenna, and yeah.
Oh, right, we were talking about that, weren't we?
We were.
Yeah. So the idea that consciousness is, or the brain is a receiver that picks up consciousness like a radio antenna.
Well, I've got kind of. I think there's two variations of it. So there's that one which I kind of not super keen on. So yeah, the idea that we are, it's literally just being beamed into us like a TV signal or something like that. And then the other one, which I think is slightly more interesting, and I'm putting some effort into kind of like, okay, is that it's more of an interaction, and like a similar to the kind of the example that's used is how kind of space time is the interaction of sort of objects of mass are creating like an interaction of gravity, which is creating a kind of like a field which things are interacting with, and that sort of conscious systems. So we are biological systems, and there is data processing going on here, but then something is emerging out of it, which is kind of giving rise to something even greater. And yeah, I just want.
Okay.
I'm wondering, like.
So wait. So I'm just trying to compare the two versions of it. So one of them is that consciousness is elsewhere, and the brain is a radio transceiver that is picking it up. And then the other one is basically the opposite, that it's generating consciousness and then putting it out into some kind of a field. Yeah, so yeah, like let's say like the first one is that you are a fairly dumb smartphone, and you are receiving YouTube, and you are playing the Josie YouTube channel
at me to give, and that's what I'm
Right.
interpreting your personality. And the second one would be that there is you are Josie, the biological system here on Earth. You are as material as you and I think that you are, but there you are interacting with something as yet undiscovered. There is something emergent, which is kind of like I say, some kind of pervasive field or some sort of whatever kind of particular bit of like sci-fi tachyon interaction nonsense you want to apply to it. But
does this go into concepts such as the collective consciousness?
I guess it could do, but I don't necessarily think it needs to do that. I think the way I've kind of understood it is it's like if we think of it in like purely materialistic terms, then consciousness kind of like does emerge from our kind of meat, but kind of ends here, and it's contained. It's within this, and then this would say this would kind of go more into some of the kind of like more kind of Buddhist or Hindu concepts. Is that no, actually, consciousness is expanding out around me, so that when I'm and it's kind of interacting with the world around me. So when I hear something outside, that is in my consciousness. Basically, we are just emanating a kind of a field of consciousness and interacting with it. So because we're all feeding into each other, then we're all interacting with each other's consciousness, basically creating this kind of like consciousness field.
Interesting.
So I'm kind of like that one's really sort of piqued my interest of late.
I'm open to the idea. I wouldn't entirely dismiss it or say that it's definitely not true. I imagine that some version of it is true. I've been thinking a lot about archetypes recently. Archetypes that are stored in the brain, and I guess people often talk about them in the context of them just kind of being out there in this field. I don't know if this is the same thing. For example, when people hallucinate, say, mantis-like creatures or reptilians or healing goddesses, that these are archetypes that people are tapping into that exist outside of the brain in some sort of collective consciousness. But I don't know. Yeah, it could be. I feel like I'm overlapping a lot of different ideas here.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, I think that like the archetypes thing is definitely interesting, because I've certainly had those kind of experiences. And again, when I was coming from like a completely skeptical view, and I was like, what the fuck is all this Mayan sort of imagery just pouring out the ceiling? Like I've got no stock in.
I have some thoughts and feelings about the Mayan and Aztec imagery.
Yeah, go for it.
Being prevalent in. Well, okay, so when I first started experiencing psychedelic geometry as someone that's quite young, I didn't use the term psychedelic geometry. The first term that came to mind for me was Aztec fractals, because to me they just looked incredibly Aztec-like, and I always wondered why are these Mayan and Aztec and other. It's mostly Mayan and Aztec, but people talk about Egyptian and Hindu stuff being involved as well in their geometry. Are we just seeing that in our psychedelic geometry or psychedelic hallucinations because we associate those societies and those cultures with this thing, and it builds up an association? Or maybe those societies and those cultures were influenced by psychedelics in some way, and they tapped into something that was already in the brain and put that kind of art out there, creating something that then people later experience and put the two together and think, why are these things the same? Or maybe the same process in the brain that generates geometry is related to the same process of developing artistic styles and languages and pictographs and stuff, so that it's all kind of the same thing, and that's why they are related. I think it's probably some combination of all three of those options, but it's something I've really been fascinated with for a while. And when we're talking about archetypes and things like that, I'm starting to come to the conclusion that there are concepts embedded within the brain from birth that are much more detailed and coherent than we would necessarily assume. It's not the tabula rasa situation, or however you pronounce it, where people are born with a completely clean slate and then they absorb all concepts externally. I do think that some things might just be in the human brain or the mammal brain or the reptile brain from birth. I think concepts of insects are a thing. I've heard that a lot of people experience snakes.
Yep.
I remember hearing a story that I have no idea if this is true, and I suspect it's not true, that Inuit tribes up in very icy places, very far north, where there are no snakes, would report hallucinations of snakes. And I think, is that just because a snake is the most basic animal? It's like a cylinder with a head on the end, right? So maybe they're just kind of coming up with that idea independently. But then, this is going to sound kind of silly, but there's a lot of videos online where you put a cucumber on the floor and a cat is afraid of it because they think it's a snake, even if they've never even seen a snake, right? So they have a concept of a snake embedded within their brain, and I don't see why that couldn't go deeper. I don't see why we can't have concepts of, union archetypes like wise old man, grandmother, different plants and animals just vaguely embedded within the brain from birth. And I think the archetypes might have built up from an evolutionary standpoint over time like that, rather than it being out there in some sort of collective unconscious. It seems entirely plausible to me, at least.
Yeah, I mean certainly with that, I think we can spot examples of it on a very simple scale, because I mean just like a classic, when you get into things like extended phenotypes. So if you go out in any forest and you will see birds making nests, and they're not taught to do it; they just do it. So there's some kind of some kind of programming somewhere within your average sparrow that tells it to start assembling twigs in a certain formation, and they'll do it in isolation. They don't need to copy it or anything like that. So this idea that we could also have, and I know people would kind of recoil a bit from the language I'm going to use, but again, if we think of it in terms of extended phenotypes, I think it works. That there is a genetic programming, I think, on some level, so that we do have these archetypes, so that we recognize, I recognize the kind of the father, the old king, sort of, and that my relationship to that. I recognize my mother, the sort of the caregiver, sort of, and I recognize the fool, and all these, things that you find in most kind of tarot decks and stuff like that. But I think that these are there as a kind of a pre-programmed way of being able to navigate the world at a simple level. That's the leader. Follow. He's the strong one. Follow him. Or he's the bell end. Ignore him. And just being able to sort of So that when we tap into the unconscious or the subconscious, that these things appear very fully fleshed out, because even if we do take it at a purely materialistic level, then we have got this amazing amount of biological computing power. Then I don't think it's surprising at all that they then take on the form of entities or beings that know us, and sort of because I could see this as some sort of this is what we're sort of programmed with. I think that particularly Jungian psychoanalysis and the sort of the archetypes that within there, I think he was really onto something.
Yeah, I guess the question is, how deep does it go? I know the only two naturally embedded fears are that of falling and sudden loud noises. But it seems that people... I think that concepts like insects and bugs are embedded within people. I think that goes a long way to explain why people see insects and bugs and spiders and such quite so commonly on delirium substances, because it's just something we know to be afraid of. We have the itching instinct because there might be an insect when we get it off. But does it go as deep as societal concepts that have only popped up in humanity in the last, couple of 100,000 years, like the ones you just described? I don't see why it couldn't. I have no idea how you would even begin to test that. But just from my experiences with psychedelics and hearing other people's experiences with psychedelics, I've come to the conclusion that concepts embedded within the human brain are much more detailed and elaborate from birth than science has any inkling of right now.
Mm-hmm. So just to tie that back to the kind of the antenna consciousness fieldy kind of stuff, I think it could be a combination of all these things. That's why I kind of prefer that when I say prefer, that's why I'm giving that one more time than the kind of the idea of like I am a empty television and I'm receiving a signal. I don't give that any sort of credibility at all. But this idea that I am a complex system. I have this this genetic programming and all sort of that's come from my lineage. I'm having my own experience, but I'm kind of interacting with something greater, and that kind of opens up to when people are having these talking like very transcendent experiences of like feeling like there's like a network of consciousness and stuff like that. It's like there's like maybe I think it allows us, I think, a bit of wiggle room between those things without sort of necessarily having to jump all in and say it's all we're all in the sort of the consciousness cloud kind of thing.
I'm open to the idea, but I would see it more as a useful metaphor than something that's literally true, as in there's literally some sort of analogous equivalent to a radio field or a field of gravity or electromagnetism or whatever that is consciousness that's emanating out of human brains. So yeah, I'm not sure I can. I would have to let that one stew before I reach.
For sure. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's literally true. I just think I think it's an interesting variation on the kind of the old TV.
Right.
Thing.
Yeah, it is. It's the difference between you're the radio versus the radio transmitter.
Yeah. I think it's. I don't know. I kind of like see some wiggle room there where it kind of like would allow for. Because I think one example that kind of springs to mind is like, like Wi-Fi connectedness. There is like a device which the device itself is like fairly intelligent and is able to do stuff. But then we're now in this world where these things are connected and something is emerging out of the connectedness. And then particularly when you get into sort of, opens the door for like, we're interacting with it as biological systems. Then you could also have like AI systems interacting with it, and so you get this whole new sort of models of consciousness emerging out of it.
I guess the way I would see it is that the field that we are interacting with when we're putting things out there is less more of a literal radio field and more of a mimetic space of culture where concepts and informational systems kind of autonomously interact with each other over time, and it's producing I guess our collective culture, and there's a system of interaction that is happening that we aren't necessarily consciously doing, and it is greater than us, and it's happening between all of us, but I wouldn't see it as like a literal energetic field.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, and I fully appreciate there's absolutely like zero evidence for anything like that, but it's I think it's
oh yeah, of course.
No, it's certainly
this is high level stoner talk.
We're going completely there. I do want to ask you, like, if you were like given complete free reign, like you would never be like held like accountable, like never be brought up again, but if there was like some batshit sort of thing that you would just want to just throw out into the ether, like some I don't know, something like your own sort of version of consciousness fields. Like, is there anything that you just like? I like this, and just like
the most batshit idea that I have that I'm inclined to.
You would entertain.
That I would entertain. Okay, so this is probably going to sound kind of weird.
Please,
when I first started going through what I felt to be, or what I called McKenna syndrome. Probably when I was around the age of 21, I could feel this compulsion inside of me to start developing a spiritual framework or a bigger picture context for my life. And I could feel that if I wasn't skeptically grounded into a rational framework, that I could have potentially gone off on the deep end. Terence McKenna style. I need to disclaim I do love Terence McKenna, he's my hero, etc. But I could feel that I would have done that. But I remember kind of engaging it and thinking, okay, what if I let my brain do this, but I try to remain grounded and rational? What's going to happen here? And what ended up happening is I decided that I wanted to analyze religions, which I classified as pre-packaged spiritual ideologies, and then I wanted to identify the consistent components within each of them, or the general frameworks that they tend to be organized around. And then I identified the components. There was a creation myth, life after death, ethical systems, various things, a conception of God, various things like that. I identified I think it was about 10 different individual subcomponents. And then I decided that I wanted to come up with rationalistic, materialistic approaches to each of these concepts that were not based in mythology, but to me were still spiritually satisfying, in order to identify a pre-packaged spiritual ideology that wasn't being pulled out of imaginary mythology, but was being pulled out of philosophical constructs that were more deeply embedded into the fabric of the universe, in order to create this. It ended up being some sort of weird neo-Buddhist thing that I called proto-theism or metatheism, and I thought of it as like an open source religion, much like a Linux operating system distro, that people could take for themselves. So you have this framework of different components, and if those components don't work for them as spiritually satisfying conceptions of the thing that it's for, they can swap them out with their own ones and create their own branches of this spiritual system. And I put a lot of work into that, and then eventually got distracted, and I figured maybe I'll eventually implement it into the backstory of like a Dungeons and Dragons character or something.
It's I mean, you say this as like one of the kind of, you know, the kind of the batshit ideas, but it's really interesting, because I must admit I've toyed with the same thing, and given like the context of everything we talked about tonight, you know, we've talked about, you know, traditional frameworks and sort of, you know, very sort of analytical frameworks, and you know, even being able to acknowledge all this sort of the weirdness of, you know, whether we got like genetic programming, archetypes, all this kind of stuff. Then and certainly I think, you know, I'm coming at it more or less from the same viewpoint as yourself, is that I want this kind of these substances, these possibilities, to be viewed in like a sort of a rational, grounded way. And so the kind of the leap I came to is like, yeah, I mean, you've got to start a cult. I mean, it's like I mean, there's not many. I'm using cult in like I'm using cult in a very glib kind of way, but
right.
But you know, what they kind of like some kind of. I think some kind of framework is needed, and it's not far from what you've just described. To be honest, maybe it might needed a few tweaks, but you know, when we talk around like, you know, the benefit that does come from these kind of rituals, and that, you know, the psychedelics kind of cascading out through the sort of the mainstream, and there's people like yourself and me, and we're doing our sort of bit to try and understand what's going on and communicate it to some sort of audience. And you know, and you could say that we're doing this purely for our own entertainment, or because we're doing it because we feel a drive to help people. I don't know, I just kind of
bit of both.
Yeah, exactly, just go with it. Yeah. But I think it does it kind of has like occurred to me, like, yeah, that at some point somebody, whether it's us or none of us, or but somebody, like, is some kind of framework is going to emerge from this, and that's going to have to go through various prototypes to get there. And yeah, and I think, you know, there's probably a few failed cults in there somewhere, but so I kind of use the frame kind of like flippantly, like, yeah, do I need to start a cult here? Like, but
best not. I'm sure it's tempting. I've been accused of running cults myself several times, and I do not want to run a cult. So
well, let me kind of frame it a little sort of inflammatory. What about if in terms of a community? And again, I realise that this is saying community is just a pre-runner to to a cult, but I think I've. Or maybe this is just me on my own verge of McKenna syndrome. I have just turned 45, so I am in the midst of a midlife crisis, probably, or at the very least I'm on the looking at like, oh, this is the point where I'm definitely not young anymore. I'm pointing towards.
Maybe it's time to start a cult.
Could be, you know. I could, like, you know, once my hair goes white and I go a bit of a beard, I could pull it off. But yeah, at least some kind of, you know, community, and certainly I think when I think of my experiences in South America on these kind of ayahuasca retreats, and sometimes, you know, I've been there for like a number of weeks. These are kind of like self-contained communities, and they do function And I'll certainly grant you that there's a fair share of these ayahuasca retreats that do go down this kind of culty kind of thing. But there's a lot that work very successfully as a kind of like a framework, as a kind of like a spiritual church kind of thing, without there being a sort of religious aspect to it. And that's fine for South America, but since, you know, I'm in Europe and this kind of psychedelic renaissance is exploring, and we can acknowledge that there is a value in this ritual element, I'm wondering, like, yeah, is there some way to implement that in somewhere like Europe? And if so, like, am I being completely consumed by hubris to think that I could be I've got any picture? But then again, who the fuck am I to be shouting my mouth off on YouTube about these things? I don't know.
Right. Yeah, I have wondered if there's going to be the emergence of some sort of modern or Western equivalent to these rituals that these more ancient cultures have, because I don't think we can just copy paste what they're doing.
For sure, yeah.
And do it in our society, because I don't think it will work in this context, because we don't relate to those kinds of things in the same way. It's one thing if you go there and you're doing it with them, but if we just start doing it over here, I don't think it's going to be the same. I think we need things that resonate with us within our culture, and it's probably it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. I do think something like that is going to come about. And it probably will be people in this community that are content creators and being more creative with it that are going to have an influence on that. I don't think any one particular person is going to come up with it entirely, but it'll be an organic process that sort of develops over time.
Yeah. Well, interestingly, I'm going on an ayahuasca retreat in January, and that's here in Europe, and that's with 2 European shamans. So this is not sort of going down this sort of... And I believe they did have some training from South America, and I think that's fine to have, you know, to have a lot of sort of inputs from all these different cultures. But yeah, this will be normally when I've been on a retreat with some in like a European setting with European shamans, I've had the exact response you just commented. I thought, this is play acting, this is pantomime, it's kind of bullshit. It didn't resonate with me. And then whereas when I'm in sort of South America, I can sort of slot into, like, adopt that framework more easily. I just couldn't accept the kind of the matrix of the European one. But no, it's been a while since I've done one of these, and somebody offered me to go and have one of these ceremonies. So I thought, right, okay, I'll give it. I'll try and go at it with a fresh set of eyes. But just in terms of what you're saying about the kind of like, yeah, let's not say European equivalent, let's like the Western equivalent. I'm
thinking Western secular culture.
Yeah, so I think there's kind of a couple of things that jump to mind, of which I've just completely forgotten the first one. But one that kind of jumped to mind, which a kind of a mutual acquaintance of ours, is the stuff that's going on with Andre Gomez Emelson, from the Coelho Research Institute.
Yeah, I know Andre.
Yeah, and he's just been taking part in this this conference stroke retreat stroke think tank thing that went down. I think it was somewhere in England when this was like sort of Dennis McKenna was there, and sort of Andrew Gallimore, and just anybody who...
I just see that he was in the UK.
Yeah.
I was wondering why he would go there of all places.
Yeah, it was something called... I've got a link to it. It's called I had no idea this was going on. It was a very exclusive event, and I think Andre is absolutely one of the right people to be there. But the Tyringham Initiative, so yeah, like Amanda Fielding, just anybody who's ever been on like a psychedelics documentary was at this place, and Rupert Sheldrake, blah blah, of all these different it wasn't just science, it was kind of all kind of disciplines around psychedelics, and yeah, Andre's been gushing about it, about like how everyone was just throwing ideas into the mix and sort of working out how these ideas could integrate together without anybody like saying, oh no, that's bullshit because I've got the right sort of theory of stuff here. So yeah, I wonder if that's some kind of way forward for these things. And I've actually remembered what my first point was, and that was that I think whatever happens, I don't think it's going to have to be that as psychedelics do explore. I think we do need to adopt this kind of group setting that these traditional settings, these traditional native sort of ceremonies have, because the idea of like, there's a lot of stuff going on with like clinical trials and things like that, where you've got sort of one person in a sort of a nerve room and everything, with headphones on and 2 medical personnel. That's just not scalable. There's no way that is going to work across society. Whereas if you've got like a couple of trained people and 25 recipients in a room, that scales a lot more.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to have to, and this is a leap, I think, for us as Westerners, because we've kind of, our cultures has backed us away to like, no, retreat, get behind my concrete fortress, everyone else fuck off, like I want to stay here. And then we're just kind of connecting over things like the internet. Whereas these kind of traditional cultures are very much like, no, let's all sit together and eat together and live together, and our villages are very interwoven. So I think this idea of like Western, like psychedelic renaissance, where we're going to have to get used to being very vulnerable in sort of spaces next to each other. And I think that's, like I said, to me, that's the only way it kind of scales. And that's certainly the kind of like...
That's a really good point, actually. I hadn't really considered that. I think we're actually getting to the point where all of these things are realistically going to have to be worked out quite soon. I don't know if you saw, Alberta legalized medical use of psychedelics from LSD, DMT, all that stuff for treating mental health conditions. Yesterday, there's a vote in Colorado coming up in November for decriminalizing psilocybin and a bunch of other plant medicines. I know one of the main funders of that initiative, and I've been involved in their ambassador program because they want me to use my online connections or whatever to get more people to vote. But it seems like it's going to go through regardless. It's polling really well, and since Colorado, which is where I'm at, they legalized recreational cannabis use several years ago, and that created a domino effect where other states started doing it. Denver decriminalized psilocybin, I think, 2 years ago, and even that started a domino effect where a few other cities around the country, I think mostly on the West Coast, have started decriminalizing psilocybin, and it feels like it's actually happening. I think the 2020s are going to be the decade of the actual psychedelic renaissance. It was not the 60s. Not that much actually happened in the 60s in comparison to what's going on now in terms of like use rates and percentage of people that are taking psychedelics. And it's all kind of coming to fruition. These things are really going to have to be figured out.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's, first of all, just that's happening. And the fact that it's happened from, being led from America is absolutely fucking mind-blowing.
Right? What are you Europeans doing? I've defected to America. Weed is legal here. Society hasn't collapsed. You think that Europeans will be leading the charge on this thing because they're more socially progressive, but it's in America where all this stuff is happening, and that genuinely confuses me.
But interestingly, which I think is actually funny, because I think, like we discussed on last time, we're both traitors. I've fled to Switzerland, you fled to the US. But when you look back on our homeland of the UK, they're just so fucking stuffy. It's like no, not happening.
It makes me. Right? There was someone talking about bumping cannabis up to a Class A drug recently. And meanwhile, I'm over here in Colorado, and you can just go to the shop and buy it. And it's I don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
I'm very fortunate that I was in the UK around 2012 to 2016 because it had the best research chemical market in the world, for better or worse, and it exposed me to so many different molecules that would have been a lot more difficult, and it was very formative for me being able to access all those different altered states of consciousness, and it led me to where I am now. But now they have a blanket ban on some of the strictest drug laws in the world. I mean, I guess we don't have the death sentence like they have in some places in Southeast Asia, but it's still not great, really.
Yeah, it's absolutely great. But just coming back to the point around the kind of the psychedelic, like the way that these things are exploding. So again, I think there's like a lot of cultural elements that are missing here beyond the kind of like the legalization part, and this is where I'm actually a little bit wary of the kind of the legalization explosion, because while certainly I'm absolutely down with people not going to jail and being sort of persecuted for these things, the bit I'd say worry a little bit around is there is going to be if these things become absolutely sort of available, then there is going to be a set of collateral damage around them, because these things are kind of I think culturally rewriting, and certainly there's a lot of people who aren't sort of ready necessarily for some of these experiences. And so it's all kind of very well, like everyone's like, oh yeah, I'll be I'll be a neo shaman, and I'll be this kind of role in here. It's like, yeah, what about the people who are going to pick up people from outside, the streets, who have gone absolutely fucking banana? Like, where's like the cultural increase, and like who's going to wants to deal with the shit of people who are going like fucking absolutely like losing their fucking minds? So yeah, I think there's a lot more open discussion required around like what's actually going to result from the psychedelics. I mean, I definitely think it's good, but I think it needs a lot more.
Yeah, I think it's an improvement. We're going to end up in really weird situations in America, where in a lot of states, psychedelics are legal for medical use, and you can access them for therapy, but only if you can afford it. Even if it gets on health insurance, like it's typically only middle class people that even have health insurance in the first place, and middle class and up, I guess. And it's just going to be this really weird situation where, in order to access something that's going to give you spiritual fulfillment, you need to argue with your health insurance on the phone, and you need to make sure that you have the money to get it in the first place. And it sounds very counterintuitive. I think it's a step up from the system we have now, but I'm kind of wary of I work for a biotech corporation. We only have 5 employees, and we're all associated with the Shulgin Foundation, so we have good intentions, but I'm not the biggest fan of capitalism, and I don't trust that everyone that's entering this space are going to have entirely good intentions. There's been some pretty unethical stuff that's gone down with monopolies on recreational cannabis and stuff, and I think similar things are going to happen within the psychedelic space. It'll be an improvement from it being criminalized, but still it's going to have its own set of problems if it's happening in this situation where we have capitalism and no public healthcare.
Yeah, I'm unsure of where I land on that one, because I totally agree. I've seen some stuff where you can see where there's somebody somewhere just rubbing their hands and like, oh, yeah, this is like the print money button. But then my kind of thought is, and this might be me being a bit naive, is that if it's kind of if things become legal or decriminalized at least, then I mean, the kind of the underground still exists. I mean, for a lot of the stuff that I'm interested in, I try and become pretty much kind of like self-sufficient anyway, in terms of like things that I grow, things that I extract, and stuff like that. So as long as I'm not being, if I could like take away that additional layer of worry, like, okay, well, I'm not going to get in shit for this, then I don't give I tend to think like I don't give a fuck what capitalists are doing. Like that doesn't encroach into my space, and I appreciate that's kind of a little selfish kind of thing, but that also, as I say,
I have selfish motivations. I like money. I want to play the game, but I do still worry that a lot of people won't have access to this stuff.
Well, I've got a solution for that.
Like ketamine therapy.
I've got a solution for that, Josie.
Okay, go on then.
Rob's cult, okay, and so as part of the activity in Rob's cult, then we would have workshops around learning to extract and grow and stuff like that. So you see, it's you get something back from Rob's DMT cult. It's actually, it's got many layers to it. But then yeah, we'll end up in there with kind of worshipping me and sending you children.
Well, if nothing else, the plant aspect of it sounds worthwhile, I guess. If people can grow their own psychedelics and they don't need to worry about dealing with their health insurance and stuff to get access to these things, maybe not. Well, maybe skip over the cult part.
Yeah, I like that. I'm being somewhat Joe, but at least then you'll be able to refer back to this video in like 10 years' time. It's like, yeah, this is it. This was the red flags.
These were the signs.
He said he was joking, but motherfucker, yeah.
That age poorly.
Plus, I could probably end up like being a cult of one. So like the lamest.
Right. Well, that doesn't sound too bad.
I know it won't be too. Anyway, I could say we're kind of coming up to like the 2-hour mark, so we kind of appreciate sort of.
Oh, geez, I haven't even been looking at the time. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, it's flown by. So I mean, last couple of things. Like, is there anything you want to like point at or shout at, or just anything, any topics you want to talk about?
Yeah, there is something I would like to talk about. So I'm starting a new online project that's an extension of Effect Index. There's a collaboration between Effect Index right now and Blue Light, and also Mindstate Design, which is the company I work for. And we're trying to set up an open source repository of trip reports that it's very easy for people to sign up to, submit their reports to, extract data from their own reports. There's going to be scientific analysis and tagging, and we're going to have a huge database of reports. Blue Light is going to collaborate with us, and they're giving us, I think, 11,000 reports. But I essentially want to usher in a new era of trip reports in which there is a central database that everybody can access and connect to, and it's free for people to legally use. Because the current model right now is that there's Arrowwood, and I respect Arrowwood a lot, but they do not let people touch their stuff from a legal standpoint. So we're trying to get around that by setting up this entirely new model, and I'm really excited about it. I got a big grant from Emergence benefactors to hire a full-time web dev to put the whole thing together. Mindstate is offering resources, like we might be doing some kind of a sponsoring program with Blue Light where we exchange data, and we're going to work together going forward. And I think that's going to be a pretty big deal, and from this model we're going to be able to analyze these reports, and it's going to contribute towards my general goal of establishing this new field of phenomenological science in which we're studying altered states of consciousness and documenting them. It's going to be the database for it, and I'm really excited about that. It's coming up. We're working on it, and yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, sure. I mean, once that's up and running, I mean, I've certainly got my own collection of trip reports, and if it's something, is it like purely text based that you're looking to that what things will be into, or are you going to like have sort of space there where people can attach different kinds of media and stuff?
I haven't really thought about video reports. It would be nice to be able to integrate that, but the thing is, you can't really tag video reports as easily. It would require entirely. If you have a bunch of text reports, I would love to have them, because I assume that your reports would be pretty high quality in comparison to the general public. But yeah, I haven't put too much thought into that. I think it's primarily going to be text-based stuff. There could easily be the option of including video content. I know you do have a lot of reports online that are videos of you tripping. But yeah, I think textual descriptions of the subjective experience is what we're going to be able to extract data from, and then eventually train a machine learning model or natural language processing system to be able to analyze this report automatically once it has a big enough training set to go off of. Because the technology for that is very much available, but you just need a training set, and we don't have that training set. And in order to make that training set, we need to manually label a bunch of reports first, so it's a huge project.
Yeah, I think for some, I would be happy to contribute to it, because pretty much nearly all the videos that I make are quite heavily scripted, so I've got it all in text format anyway. So yeah,
please send those to me. I would love that.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, by all means, once that's kind of up and running and available to the public, let me know, and I'll do what I can to help promote that. So just send me whatever information you've got on it.
Thanks. It's going to have the new subjective effect index, which I've largely already created based on this literature review, and that's all going to be tied into it. And we're going to use this classification system as the tagging system for those reports in order to build up this huge predictive analytical model of psychedelic experience of altered states of consciousness in general. It could be applied to any altered state of consciousness, be it meditation, drugs, whatever.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I mean, look forward to. I mean, based on your previous work, I look forward to seeing what you come up with, Josie. And I say, send me the links. I'll put them all in the description below to things like subjective effects index and to your YouTube channel. To anybody who's watching, yeah, go and follow Josie's videos. Go and check out the replication subreddit. All these different pies that she has her various online fingers in. So that sounded a bit weirder than what I think I decided. I had one of those. There's a lot of them. One of those moments like yourself. It just came out, Josie. I wasn't thinking too much of it.
It's a metaphor. It's fine.
And on that note, yeah, thanks a lot for. It's been a real pleasure talking to you. I really enjoyed the conversation. Time's just flown by. So yeah, thanks for making the time, and let's do it again sometime.
Yeah, it's been great talking. We'll do it again when I have more updates.
Awesome.